happened quietly, under the cover of darkness, on a warm night in July 2008. A convoy of trucks crept along the remote roads of Jamaica, heading toward a pristine beach in Coral Spring. There were no lights, no noise, just a shadowy procession moving in silence. When they finally reached the shore, something bizarre and almost unthinkable took place. Using heavy machinery, loaders, and even handheld shovels, a crew began scooping up the beach itself. Not just bits of sand, but all of it. An entire 1,300-foot stretch of soft, white Caribbean beach was packed into around 500 trucks and hauled away before the sun rose. By morning, the tropical shoreline had transformed into a barren moonscape. All that golden sand, meant for a luxury resort, had vanished. And just like that, $1 million worth of sand disappeared without a trace. The police had nothing to work with. No suspects, no clear leads, no tire tracks, just the empty husk of what had once been a beautiful beachfront. And the craziest part? This wasn't just a bizarre one-time heist. What happened in Jamaica is part of a much bigger, global phenomenon, one that's rarely discussed, yet has massive consequences. Because there is, in fact, a sand mafia. And it's not just real, it's powerful, organized, and deeply profitable. Yes, you can steal just about anything in today's world: money, art, even houses. But most people wouldn't imagine someone attempting to steal an entire island. Yet that's exactly what began to unfold in 2015 in Indonesia. Fishermen near Pari Island, part of the Thousand Islands chain north of Jakarta, noticed an unusual vessel anchored offshore. It was a 98-foot ship, and it wasn't just sitting idly. The crew had lowered long hoses into the sea and had begun sucking up sand from the seabed at an alarming rate. The spot where the ship was working used to be a sandbank, an area where fishermen anchored their boats. But before long, that sandbank was gone, and along with it, their fishing nets and their livelihood. The perpetrators vanished as quickly as they had arrived. When the fishermen reported the incident to authorities, the truth slowly began to emerge. This wasn't an isolated theft. This was part of a pattern that was making actual landmasses disappear. Since 2005, 26 islands in Indonesia's Riau province have been wiped off the map due to illegal sand mining. Their sandy foundations were sucked up and shipped away, often sold to foreign countries for construction. And the worst part? Over 2,000 more small islands across Indonesia are now at risk of the same fate. And this isn't limited to Southeast Asia. Across the globe, a silent, lucrative underworld is thriving: the illegal sand trade. In Morocco, the depth of this criminal enterprise was uncovered through a risky undercover operation. A group of investigators, led by a transnational crime expert, posed as developers seeking materials for a massive construction project. One of the team members visited a known sand site, pretending to be bidding for a tender. The response was stunning. Contractors confidently promised to mobilize hundreds of trucks and heavy equipment within a week. All that was needed was demand, and supply would follow fast. In the city of Casablanca, another investigator approached a truck driver who regularly hauled sand. The driver casually mentioned that deliveries could be made at night using up to 250 trucks, thanks to a syndicate of firms. And once the sand was delivered to a construction site, it would be mixed with legally obtained sand. After that, there was no way to distinguish the two. The stolen sand had become part of the system, completely untraceable. The way sand is extracted varies. Small-scale operations may involve just a few men with carts and shovels, taking what they can from the beach. But larger efforts are far more sophisticated. Criminals deploy barges and ships fitted with industrial dredgers to vacuum up thousands of tons of sand from the ocean floor. These operations are often conducted at night, far offshore, where the noise won't draw attention. In some places like Indonesia, the coastline stretches for thousands of miles, much of it unguarded, offering easy access for illegal sand mining. But in Morocco, investigators witnessed something even more brazen: dozens of trucks operating in broad daylight, right on the beach. Shockingly, local gendarmes stood guard, not to stop the operation, but to keep outsiders away. This suggests an even more disturbing truth. In some regions, sand theft isn't just tolerated, it's protected. When money flows, corruption often follows. In India, the method is different, but the scale is equally shocking. Near a river close to Mumbai, hundreds of small wooden boats float side by side, forming long, uneven lines that stretch for nearly half a mile. Each boat has a crew of 6 to 10 people. A few of them dive to the riverbed, using metal buckets to scoop up sand. Others, standing barefoot on narrow planks, pull the buckets up with ropes. They repeat this exhausting process up to 200 times a day. When the operation began years ago, divers only needed to descend about 20 feet to reach the sand. But now, they're going down 39 feet. And at 49 feet, it becomes too dangerous to continue. Once the riverbed is too deep, the whole operation relocates. Once stolen, the sand is sold, often illegally exported with fake paperwork. Sometimes, all it takes is a name change. When Indonesia banned the export of sea sand, companies simply rebranded it as land sand or coastal sand and continued shipping it abroad. In many cases, customs officials either don't notice or don't care. Part of the problem is that illegal sand mining looks a lot like legal operations. The same machinery, the same workers, and often, the same construction sites. If there's no complaint from a landowner or local authority, it's easy for everyone to turn a blind eye. What makes all this even more concerning is the scale of global demand. Sand is everywhere. It's used in roads, buildings, glass, electronics, and even toothpaste. But its most critical use is in construction. Sand is a key ingredient in concrete, and the modern world is built on concrete. Every year, humanity consumes up to 50 billion tons of sand. That makes it the most extracted natural resource on Earth after water. From highways to skyscrapers, nothing gets built without it. Consider this. Constructing a 3,300-foot highway requires over 27,000 tons of sand. A modest concrete house needs about 181 tons. A hospital, around 3,000 tons. And the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, currently the world's tallest building, used a staggering 5 million tons of sand in its construction. To visualize the demand, imagine this. If all the sand used in just 1 year were piled into a wall, it would be 65 feet high and 65 feet wide, and it would wrap around the entire equator. Nowhere is this demand more intense than in China. Between 2011 and 2013 alone, China used more cement than the United States did in the entire 20th century, 6.6 gigatons compared to 4.5. That's just a snapshot of how rapidly development is accelerating in parts of the world. Experts estimate the legal sand trade is worth around $100 billion annually. But unofficial reports suggest it could be much higher. Some say up to $785 billion. With those kinds of numbers, it's no surprise that a black market has emerged. In Singapore, for instance, the price of imported sand was just $3 per ton in 1995. By 2005, it had skyrocketed to $190. That's more than a 60-fold increase in just 10 years, and the trend is still going up. But not all sand is created equal. The best sand for construction comes from riverbeds, lakes, and coastal areas, where the grains are angular and stick together well in concrete. Desert sand, on the other hand, is too smooth and rounded, making it mostly useless for building. And so, the hunt for quality sand pushes criminals to rivers, beaches, and shallow seas, places already under pressure from erosion, rising sea levels, and overdevelopment. The consequences are severe. Ecosystems are destroyed, fisheries collapse, islands disappear, and the poorest communities are often hit the hardest, losing both their land and their livelihoods. Despite the massive scale of the problem, illegal sand mining remains understudied and poorly regulated. Much of it takes place in remote areas, far from public view, and often with the complicity of those in power. So next time you walk on a beach, admire a towering skyscraper, or drive down a newly paved road, remember, there's a hidden cost to our concrete world. And sometimes, the most ordinary substance, sand, can be the most extraordinary crime. In 2021, news outlets started buzzing once again with something new. China was building yet another mysterious structure in the middle of the Gobi Desert. At first glance, it didn't raise too many eyebrows. After all, China is no stranger to grand-scale construction projects in the middle of nowhere. But this time, it wasn't a solar farm or a military testing site. It turned out to be a nuclear power facility. Still not surprising? Fair enough. China already has dozens of nuclear plants scattered across the country. But dig a little deeper, and things start to get a lot more interesting. Because this wasn't just any nuclear reactor. This one was powered by a rather obscure element, thorium. And the more you learn about it, the more it starts to feel like something out of a science fiction novel. Back in 1828, the Swedish chemist Jöns Jacob Berzelius discovered a new element and gave it a name that sounded straight out of Norse mythology. He called it thorium, after Thor, the god of thunder. On the periodic table, thorium sits with the actinides and carries the atomic number 90. It's a silvery metal, slightly radioactive, and it turns out, it might just hold the key to revolutionizing nuclear energy. Now, if the word radioactive makes you uneasy, don't worry. Thorium is radioactive, but only mildly. That's because all naturally occurring thorium is thorium-232, an isotope with a half-life so long it stretches the imagination. To put it in perspective, thorium-232 has been around since before the Earth was even formed. Some scientists believe it predates the solar system itself, possibly even going back to the aftermath of the Big Bang. And billions of years later, it's still decaying, very slowly. Because of its low-level radiation, thorium is surprisingly safe to be around in small concentrations. In fact, it's found in beach sand all around the world. One of the most common minerals containing thorium is called monazite. This mineral can contain anywhere from 3.5% to 10% thorium by weight. That might not sound like a lot, but when you consider the sheer volume of monazite-rich sand in certain parts of the world, it adds up. So, how much thorium do we actually have access to? Well, thorium is far more common than you might think. In the Earth's crust, it's found an average of 10.5 parts per million. For comparison, tin, a metal we use all the time, is present at only 2.3 parts per million. Even gold, that famously precious metal, only appears at about 1.8 parts per million. Thorium is, relatively speaking, everywhere. When it comes to national reserves, India holds the top spot. The country has about 340,000 tons of thorium, most of it in its western coastal regions, where monazite sands are abundant. China isn't far behind, with roughly 280,000 tons of industrial reserves. But there's an important difference. India's thorium is mainly found in beach sands, while China's thorium is buried deeper and not mined directly. So how is China getting its hands on so much thorium? Here's the clever part. China doesn't need to mine thorium directly. That's because thorium is a byproduct of rare earth mining, and in the world of rare earth elements, China is the undisputed heavyweight champion. As of 2023, China produced 70% of the world's rare earth elements and processed about 90% of them. These materials are essential for making everything from smartphones and electric vehicles to wind turbines and guided missiles. And the epicenter of this production is a massive operation in Inner Mongolia, the Bayan mine, located about 93 miles northwest of Baotou, spread over 19 square miles. It holds a majority of China's rare earth reserves, and one of its key minerals is, once again, monazite. After extracting the rare earth elements from monazite, what's left behind is usually discarded as waste. But that so-called waste contains significant quantities of thorium. So, thanks to its booming rare earth industry, China ends up with a steady, almost effortless supply of thorium. This gives the country a serious strategic advantage. Thorium has a variety of uses. It's added to metal alloys like magnesium and aluminum to improve their strength and heat resistance. It's also used in welding electrodes and even in high-end optical lenses, where it helps increase light refraction. These applications are helpful, but they pale in comparison to thorium's most promising use, nuclear power. The idea of using thorium as nuclear fuel isn't new. Back in the 1960s, American scientists at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee experimented with a completely different kind of nuclear reactor, one that didn't rely on uranium or plutonium. Led by nuclear pioneer Alvin Weinberg, researchers developed a reactor that ran on uranium-233, which isn't found naturally but can be produced by irradiating thorium-232 with neutrons. Over time, thorium-232 absorbs a neutron, undergoes a few decay steps, and becomes uranium-233, a fissile material capable of sustaining a nuclear chain reaction. Between 1965 and 1969, Oak Ridge ran an experimental molten salt reactor for a total of 15,000 hours. It used a mixture of fluoride salts with thorium dissolved into the solution, producing nearly 8 megawatts of thermal power. It was a major technological breakthrough, but the world wasn't ready. The materials needed to handle the high temperatures and corrosive nature of the molten salt weren't available at the time. Additionally, the U.S. nuclear industry had already committed to uranium-based solid fuel reactors, which were better understood and aligned more closely with military needs. The thorium reactor was shelved and largely forgotten, until now. Fast forward to 2021. Deep in the Gobi Desert, about 75 miles from the city of Wuwei, China successfully built and tested a new molten salt thorium reactor. For the first time since Oak Ridge, a thorium-powered system achieved stable nuclear fission. The Chinese reactor isn't huge. Its thermal output is just 2 megawatts, and it doesn't yet generate electricity. But that's about to change. China plans to scale up and build a new reactor with a thermal capacity of 60 megawatts and an electrical output of 10 megawatts. These are still small by commercial standards, but they mark a significant milestone. You might be asking, why go through all this trouble? Why not just stick with tried-and-true uranium reactors? There are several compelling reasons. First, China is concerned about long-term uranium supply. The country has over 50 nuclear power plants that together generate roughly 400 terawatt-hours of electricity per year. That accounts for about 5% of China's total energy production, which, given China's massive demand, is a substantial chunk. And it's only the beginning. Between 2005 and 2020, China added about 3.4 gigawatts of nuclear capacity annually. From 2020 onward, They've increased that goal to 9 gigawatts per year. Clearly, the country is betting big on nuclear, and that means finding alternative fuels is crucial. Thorium is 3 times more abundant than uranium. According to some estimates, China's thorium reserves alone could power the nation for up to 20,000 years. That kind of energy security is hard to ignore. And there's more. China, like much of the world, is pushing toward zero emissions. The country is investing heavily in solar, wind, and hydropower, but these sources have limitations. Nuclear energy, on the other hand, is dense, reliable, and carbon-free. While traditional uranium reactors have long raised concerns about safety and nuclear waste, thorium-based systems offer promising solutions. For one, they produce far less long-lived radioactive waste. The molten salt design is also considered inherently safer. If the reactor overheats, the fuel can drain into a containment vessel and cool off naturally, avoiding meltdowns. So, what China is doing in the Gobi Desert isn't just another mega project. It's a potential leap forward in how humanity generates clean, abundant energy. With the world facing increasing pressure to decarbonize and reduce its reliance on fossil fuels, thorium might just be the underdog we've been waiting for. And if that's the case, we'll be seeing a lot more quiet revolutions beginning in the desert. Vast stretches of golden sand slowly turning green, millions of trees planted on barren ground, hundreds of square miles of once lifeless desert transformed into fertile land where farming and life itself can thrive again. This isn't science fiction. It's a real-life environmental revolution led by China, a country that has taken the challenge of turning the uninhabitable into the livable to a whole new level. With the collective effort of local communities, experts, and national authorities, China is reversing decades of damage done to its arid landscapes. And although desertification remains a significant threat, China's large-scale greening projects have shown that even the harshest terrains can be reclaimed. One of the most ambitious of these efforts is centered in the Muus Desert. Here, Chinese citizens planted thousands of saplings directly into the sand, often with little or no water. The idea sounded impossible. So what happened next? Let's find out. Northern China, specifically the Ordos Plateau in the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, was once a lush area filled with rivers, lakes, and dense vegetation. It was home to thriving ecosystems and vibrant biodiversity. But over time, human activity took a heavy toll. Deforestation, overgrazing by livestock, and unsustainable farming practices slowly chipped away at the land's fertility. What remained was a vast, expanding desert. By the mid-20th century, the Muus Desert had swallowed up over 16,000 square miles of land. Fertile soil was replaced by shifting dunes and rocky plains. Once productive farmlands turned to dust. The desert became not just a symbol of environmental degradation, but a daily struggle for survival. Take the city of Ulan, for example, located right on the desert's edge. Over the decades, sandstorms repeatedly buried homes, farmland, and roads. The winds were so powerful and frequent that Ulan had to be relocated not once, but 3 times. Harsh winters added another layer of difficulty, with freezing temperatures transforming the desert into a deadly, icy wasteland. Locals would often wake up to find thick layers of sand piled against their doors. Digging out was a daily routine. Abandoned homes, left unprotected, were quickly consumed by the dunes, their roofs and walls slowly disappearing beneath the sand. And all the while, the desert kept growing. Records from Ulan show that in the 100 years leading up to 1949, about 540 square miles of fertile land were overtaken by sand. 6 county-level towns and over 400 villages and settlements were either damaged or lost entirely. By that time, forest and grassland coverage in the region had plummeted to just 1.8%. People considered leaving. But for most, there was nowhere to go. The 1950s and 60s were a time of extreme hardship for China. Following the rise of the People's Republic, the nation underwent a radical transformation, socially, economically, and environmentally. During the Great Leap Forward, traditional farming systems were upended in favor of large-scale collective agriculture, but the methods used were often untested and inefficient. One of the more infamous examples was the Four Pests campaign, a well-intentioned but ultimately disastrous attempt to eliminate rats, flies, mosquitoes, and sparrows. With sparrows nearly wiped out, locust populations exploded, decimating crops and triggering one of the worst famines in human history. By 1959, over 600 million people were living in poverty. That year's harvest was 15% lower than in 1958, and by 1960, agricultural output had dropped to just 70% of what it had been 2 years prior. In purely numeric terms, China's agricultural production fell from 200 million tons in 1958 to only 143.5 million tons by 1960. This crisis only worsened the situation in desert regions like Moas. Starvation forced people to make hard choices: stay and fight the land, or perish. So they fought, but not with weapons, with trees. In the 1950s and 60s, a grassroots movement began to take shape. Locals, determined to reclaim their land, started planting trees by hand, millions of them. Some even sold their livestock to buy saplings, understanding that the animals wouldn't survive without vegetation anyway. One farmer famously sold 84 sheep to buy enough saplings to create a 3.7-mile-long green belt along the southern edge of the Moas Desert. He wasn't alone. Entire families dedicated decades of their lives to planting and nurturing trees. In some cases, 3 generations worked on the same plot of land, slowly turning sand into soil. As the trees took root, they began to change the landscape. Their roots helped stabilize the sand, brought water closer to the surface, and created shade, conditions that encouraged smaller plants and grasses to grow. With every new tree, the next batch had a better chance of survival. The Chinese government supported these efforts. Scientists were brought in to study desertification and recommend solutions. Water-retaining grasses and drought-resistant trees were introduced, and over time, the once unstoppable dunes began to slow. But one major problem remained: moisture, or rather, the lack of it. Most deserts, including Moas, suffer from extremely low rainfall and high evaporation rates. As a result, many planted saplings withered and died, despite the best efforts of locals. That changed in 2004, when a desertification expert proposed a groundbreaking solution. His team introduced a soil hydrodynamic treatment method, essentially preparing the soil in a way that retains moisture and reduces evaporation. The process helps balance the needs of young plants with the water-holding potential of the soil. The result? Survival rates soared. Suddenly, it became possible to plant trees in dry desert soil without irrigation and still have them thrive. So what has all this hard work led to? The results are nothing short of miraculous. One powerful photo comparison tells the story best. In 1998, a young boy and his grandfather planted a poplar tree in the Moas Desert. By 2020, both the tree and the boy, now a man, had grown tall. Behind them, what was once a desolate landscape had become a green oasis. Since the beginning of the campaign, over 40 million trees have been planted in the Moas Desert. Species like Glan's larch, a hardy evergreen introduced decades ago, are now thriving thanks to these new techniques. Today, Glan's larch covers more than 330 square miles of the desert. And larch is just the beginning. In nearby Yanwan, on the edge of the Moas Desert, the AI Lavender Ecological Base has become a colorful paradise. Covering over 4,900 acres, the area now blooms with more than 3,000 acres of lavender, plus hundreds of acres of other flowers like verbena and chrysanthemums. Ulan, once a symbol of desertification, now stands as a model of recovery. Forest coverage in the city rose from less than 2% in the 1950s to 33% by 2020. Every year, locals continue to plant thousands more saplings. In 2020 alone, their target was to reforest nearly 1,000 acres of desert. The government and private companies have also joined the fight. In the first quarter of 2020, 41 entities, both public and private, planted trees on more than 82,000 acres of land near Ulan. But what about the bigger picture? Well, the results are even more astonishing. In the 20th century, the Moas Desert stretched across 16,300 square miles. Today, over 93% of that land has been reclaimed, now covered with greenery, thriving ecosystems, and agricultural potential. Once a barren stretch of wasteland, the Moas Desert is rapidly becoming a symbol of resilience, restoration, and hope. While challenges still remain, especially with ongoing climate change, the progress made so far proves that with determination, science, and community effort, even the harshest environments can be brought back to life. So, can deserts be stopped? In China's case, the answer is already growing.